guess let's get started. Uh, again, today's topic is privacy code scanning, the missing piece in your privacy stack. We have, you know, Sam and Nishant, which I'm going to introduce really soon. And yeah, just from a housekeeping perspective, today's webinar is being recorded. So, you can always refer back to it, share it with more people. And this webinar, amongst all other webinars, and Sam has been here before as well, is part of our initiative to be part of the privacy community. So even afterwards, if you have any questions, feel free to link up with me, Nishant, and Sam, and send across your questions. We also have a Slack community which you can join and ask more questions at any point of time. With that, one last piece, there is a Q&A and a chat option. You'll see it in the bottom of your Zoom screens. So whenever you have any questions all through the webinar, feel free to add them as Q&A and we'll pick them up. And we also have a dedicated Q&A section towards the end, so I'll open it up then as well. But if something seems interesting and you want to ask a question, just put it in the Q&A then and there. And feel free to use the chat option to just chat amongst each other. With that, let me start the webinar today. So, hey everyone, I am Vaibhav. I'm the founder and CEO of Privado. Privado is a privacy code scanning solution which helps companies to get visibility, governance, and enable engineers by scanning your software and helping you find what personal data you collect, share, and process. With me on the panel today is Nishant Bhajaria and Sam Miller. Nishant Bhajaria is also our privacy advisor. So, Nishant, why don't you first start and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Vaibhav. So yes, I'm part of the Privado team as an advisor. I have worked with them to sort of shape the code scanning solution and build the privacy engineering community, because what we are finding out across the industry is people have the same needs, the same challenges, but don't know where to go and how to ask. How do you build the right workforce? How do you build the right tooling? So the goal here is to not just talk about code scanning, but talk about that in terms of the larger governance mission that most companies have and how it can make life easier for your developers and create a culture of efficiency. So that's kind of the goal here. Thank you, Vaibhav. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, and Sam Miller is from Riot Games. They're also one of our customers. So, thanks a lot for doing this, Sam. Over to you for your introduction.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. My name is Sam Miller. I am a senior privacy engineer at Riot Games. I've been having the pleasure to work with V for about a year and a half. So I'm really excited to kick this off and hear you guys' thoughts. And please ask us anything at any time.
Perfect. Awesome. So, here are a few things that we want to definitely talk about today. We're going to focus on, if you're here on the panel, we're going to focus on the software a little bit, especially if you're a technology-driven company, your company has engineers building products, website, apps, uh, typical approaches to data mapping where privacy code scanning fits in, and then Q&A. Before we go in there, we have a quick poll that we want to launch and just get a good sense of the people and the audience a little bit. So someone from Privado, if you can launch the poll, it'll be nice now. Perfect. So you all must be seeing a poll on your screen. We just want to get a sense of what your current role looks like. And based on that, we'll tweak the webinar a little bit and answer the questions accordingly. So if you all can just answer whatever option fits best. If not, if something doesn't fit, please put it on the chat as well. So last time we did this webinar or a version of this at IPP, we had like a pretty, Sam, if you remember, a pretty broad audience. So I'm actually curious to see what the split is going to be today once the poll ends and we have results.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I wonder if we're going to have more engineers this time.
Okay, awesome. It's actually pretty interesting. It's kind of similar in some sense. In fact, so we have like leadership and legal team, and then privacy operations seems to be the biggest one. The technical privacy team is the smallest portion, and then privacy consulting is huge. So we have a lot of people consulting from an outside experience as well. So this is interesting to kind of walk the audience through all of that. So I think, yeah, this is perfect context. So let me jump into today's session and what we're going to cover. So as you're building your privacy program, as you're kind of maturing it, we see kind of like three big challenges that we are going to focus and kind of look at the root cause of that. The first thing we really see is visibility. So as you're building your data maps, your data inventory, even if you're implying data discovery tool or using data discovery tool, just to get the full picture of use of data, flow of data, that seems to be still manual and imprecise. So we're going to focus on why that gap exists. The second thing, we know there is a lot of leadership and people from legal team here. As privacy, as you're looking at governance overall, you have to make promises which are to your users, customers, regulators, but there does not seem to be a way for you to enforce that as engineers build products. So how can you have centralized governance in a decentralized engineering environment? And finally, like something which is close to my heart, enablement, which is how do you enable as privacy engineers to build privacy in their products from the start? So these are some of the things we're going to discuss. And I think a lot of these challenges that I kind of posed in the last slide come back to having a nice, clean data map, which is up to date, builds up your inventory, builds up your privacy program, builds up, gives you auditable reports, helps you do DSARs better, helps you generate documentation better. So kind of like the fundamental piece that everyone is trying to solve for. And but when we look at this fundamental piece, we see like one key gap uh, in here. We see generally companies don't have software as part of the data map. So I'm going to hand it over to Sam and ask her, like, Sam, when you kind of were building this data mapping or that entire approach for Riot Games, how did you kind of arrive to privacy code scanning as, being part of your data mapping solution?
So for me, it was more like we have a map of our data. We know exactly what our data, like where it lives, where it stores, but we don't really know exactly how the data got there. And so in order to find that evidence, in order to be like, this is something that we can actually say it's very true. It's something that has, it comes from the services that do store the data. So able to have that lineage and understand exactly where else does it go? Does it go to third parties? Does it go to another store? Does it get ingested by another service? So we just really wanted to understand exactly through and through how the data got there, not just what data we had, but how it got there.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, right? So I mean, like from what we've been observing as well from a marketplace perspective, right? Uh, a lot of the logic of data, right? Like while you can scan your data stores and figure out where your data lives, but the logic of how that data gets collected, used, processed, stored, and shared is written in software by engineers as product features, use cases. And you might be reviewing the use cases, I'm sure, but from an automation perspective, if you have to rely on people to tell you their use case, then your privacy program is still manual, it's still not mature. So Nishant, I've read your book. In your book, you kind of gave that data funnel example and kind of explained everyone on how to build that data discovery tool or the approaches you can take from a build or a buy perspective. Uh, it's been a couple of years since the book came out, and you've been working with us as well. What's your perspective on the software layer or privacy code scanning in general and why it's important?
Yeah, so thank you, Vaibhav. That's a great question. So one of the challenges the industry has grappled with in the last couple of years is called shift left. How do you go further to the left and avoid a situation where you're using the warehouse as the only place for governance? Because by that point, people have used the data, they've shared it, collected it, etc. So it's very hard to fix the problem at the warehouses because the volume is just really high and the quality is not great. Visibility is even worse. It's like driving your car through a fog. You need lights, but the problem is not the lights. The problem is the fog. We need to clear the fog somehow so we know exactly where we are going. So what we're proposing here in this screen, and Sam made an excellent point, is that the data may not be able to tell the story. Like you may not be able to access the data and understand exactly where it came from, who collected it, and what's going to do next. So as you go further and further, you want to enable the engineers to give them the visibility. And as a former engineer, I can tell you, I'm looking for one thing: convenience and expediency. So I want to do the right thing, but not at the expense of too much process. So how do we make sure that engineers get the visibility, the coaching, and the training in real time and build a culture around efficiency and compliance and transparency? So code scanning is a pretty critical part. So you can essentially go from the data to the code, from the code to the data. But at the end of the day, you end up with more continuous visibility. And the most important thing is if an engineer is coding things incorrectly, she or he wants to understand exactly how and why to do it correctly. So code scanning is a way to essentially create scalable governance, to Sam's point, create the right tooling, again, to Sam's point. But even more important than all of that is to create this culture where doing the right thing and the smart thing are the same thing. Because in this age of efficiency, you simply cannot analyze data your way out of this problem. Like, you cannot just depend upon data. You have to attack the code, because there are three components to risk: data, infra, and code. And code is what changes continuously and leads to the other changes on the infra and the data side. So start with the code and then continue from that point forward. So shift left and do the right thing.
Awesome. Shift left to do the right thing. That's a good quote there. And I also love the fact about, like, as an engineer, I was a product manager back in the day, so worked with engineers a lot. But yeah, they want to do the right thing. So, but you need to make it convenient and easy for them. So that's a great point there. Perfect. And if you have to just kind of visualize this, what does it really mean? Here's like a simple example of that, right? So think of a website which is using IP address for n number of use cases. Maybe you're storing IP for fraud prevention or for retargeting or personalization to figure out the location. And you scan your data stores and you figure out, hey, this data store has IP address and something you want to get rid of. And let's say you do it. The bigger problem with just doing that, and if you don't kind of solve it at the code level, is that will keep appearing. So the fact what a code scanning approach enables you to do is find things at the root cause, which is basically in the software, to say, hey, we have an issue in the software, and that's where we are either collecting more data that we should or storing data more than we should. And once you fix it there proactively, then it doesn't appear, right? So it's kind of that, uh, if you know there is water on your floor because your roof is leaking, if you just clean the water from the floor, it'll keep coming back because you didn't fix the leak. So if you fix the leak, then you've permanently solved the problem. So it's kind of like that.
Exactly.
And another kind of perspective on just looking at the software piece a little bit and kind of imagining is what I love to take an example is, let's say, the Zoom webinar, right? So for example, everyone who dialed in today on the webinar, either if you're dialing in from a desktop, you basically either open it on a browser or the Zoom desktop app, or if you're on a phone, then you might have the Zoom mobile app. So typically, if you are working in a company which builds software, your customers interact with your first layer of data, which is of code, which is this user interface. So think of this as your mobile app, your website, all of that. But then right now, as we're talking and this video is being streamed, that doesn't happen on your mobile app locally. That happens via the server that Zoom has, which is the second layer, which is this big piece of software layer. And this is where the complexity lies. So when Sam was saying that, hey, we have great visibility, or, as a company, you might have great visibility from a data perspective. You might know your data sits in a specific database or in a data warehouse. It's the piece in the middle. It's that software or that feature that someone is writing, which is actually taking that data, taking this video stream and streaming it back to your mobile app or website, right? So if you are building your privacy program, and if you have done your data discovery well, or if you haven't done that as well, what you're ending up doing is you're interviewing product managers and engineers to figure out their use cases, which is in the centerpiece. It's basically the software in the middle that you're really mapping. And what a privacy code scanning solution enables you to do is just scan the same software to give you the mapping automatically. So scan your mobile app and website, scan your features and use cases related software, and tell you this is what you exactly do with data. This is where you share it. This is what you use it for, all of that nice stuff. So Sam, a question for you. I know when we kind of started interacting, you had like a good sense of a data lineage which existed in, the data discovery or a data catalog tool. When you look at data lineage, which a code scanning tool provides to you, how is it different? Where does it add value in that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So what the difference is that there's many tools that actually do scan and discover all your data. But the difference is that now you're going from the beginning of time. So where, somebody logs in and, they type in all the information, the credentials and all that good stuff. And then they get rejected to another identity service to then actually log into that interface. So there's a lot of things that's happening underneath the hood. And so during those times and those moments that things are happening underneath the hood, you're not really able to actually use tools to actually scan and collect all that data, because a lot of that is like in transit. And since that data and that information is within the code base itself, you're able to see and pinpoint exactly what is happening, where it's going, what third parties are ingesting it. And as a developer, I really want to know that, there can be issues or repercussions because maybe I'm accidentally logging an IP address where I shouldn't be logging an IP address, and it's going to the console log, and actually it's getting exposed to the end user. It's stuff like that that really matters because it provides us information to be able to action on it and actually think about it next time we develop.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point. And kind of like I was just referring back to all the FTC enforcements that have happened over the last month, and also like the breach information, especially on the health side. If you look at that, all of that is just on the first layer, which is a mobile app having an SDK or a website having a pixel, and then accidental data sharing. So the fact that sometimes as you're writing code, you're just like as an engineer or a product manager, they might be naming an event as, I don't know, like uh, signed up for the last 90 days, and only like as privacy people, that could contain personal data or health data. And that's a fact that a code scanning solution can surface for you, saying that we know for a fact these are events which are going to Google Analytics or Facebook, and then you can make the determination if it's leaking health data or not, right? But the fact that you need visibility, if you don't scan the software, you will never have that data flow visibility. You'll never know the risk that sits in the software, because you'll have to rely on people to tell you, hey, we have Google Analytics integrated, but we don't know what actual data we share with it, right? So that's all logic written in the code. Nishant, over to you. Like, if you have to
Yeah.
kind of like look at this and give your perspective, how do you interpret this?
Yeah, so I'm going to continue the bucket of water analogy above the roof is leaking. So there are three steps to that. Like first is you panic and you clean the floor. And then you realize that the roof is still leaking and then you fix the roof. But then you move to another step of maturity where you say, let's have our furnace inspected every year so the leak shouldn't happen to begin with. Code scanning is like that. It is your inspection to prevent a leaky floor and a leaky roof. That's number one. The second thing I'll give you an example is if you remember the Colonial Pipeline breach a few years ago, where credentials were found on the dark web and the hacker was able to get in and shut down pipeline supply for the East Coast for like a few hours, right? In that case, if you try with the data, it's very hard to understand exactly how the breach happened. It is very hard to look at the logs, so the breach has already happened. So what you want to do is scan the code and identify that somebody somewhere is writing credentials to a file that is not PG encrypted, that is not access monitored, that is, nobody deletes it, right? So you can understand that somebody somewhere in the company thinks it's a good idea to write that those credits someplace. Now, it may be the right thing to do, but you want to confirm that that code is current, somebody owns it, and the credentials are properly retired. So this is not an abstraction, folks. Like when you don't scan your code, you are essentially sitting on capabilities that could either make you a lot of money or lose you a lot of money. And that uncertainty, like not knowing which way you swing, that's the issue. So code scanning is about creating that visibility, like Sam pointed out, and making sure that you know exactly what, yeah, the non-nonsensical code. So, well, I'll let you take it. I know you like this code a lot.
Yeah, no, I think when we were prepping for the webinar, Nishant, you kind of brought this point about like, it's the uncertainty, the unknown kind of starts hurting you. And I think like software, at least in privacy programs, seems to be like that at the
Mhm.
moment, because the only way for you to get visibility there is, I mean, if you don't scan your software, is you have to actually interview people. And the problem is, who do you interview? Because like even a small piece of like in mobile app, there's hundreds of people building the app. In fact, like if you have an Apple app right now, there is a privacy manifest requirement. If you go to Apple forums, you will see how many engineers are frustrated because their apps are being rejected, because multiple people worked on it. They don't know if they have a specific SDK or a Apple required reason API, and what's the purpose of it, right? So a privacy law is like that, but on scale, because it's not just the Apple app or the Android app or the website. It's all of the software that supports the app, right? Like as I was saying, like if you use Netflix, Nishant is wearing the t-shirt. When you log into Netflix using your credentials, there's some software which is written by someone which actually authenticates Nishant, saying, yeah, Nishant is a user. And then another software which looks at your current membership and say you are on, I don't know, whichever plan. So based on that, your streaming quality is decided. So all of these features that you're trying to map, which are part of privacy policies, are actually pieces of software written by someone. So that's the unknown where you could actually process very little data to determine if Nishant Nishant's plan, or you can like process more data. All of those decisions are done by engineers and product people as they write code. And one way to solve for that is do a privacy threat assessment, which you can do for big features. But if you want to do it at scale and with less people and more automation, like privacy code scanning actually helps you figure out this unknown. I don't know, Sam and Nishant, if you wanted to add something on this slide.
Yeah, I'll say one thing and I hand over to Sam. I think what people often real mistake, they say, oh my goodness, we're not going to get fined. It's going to happen to somebody else. It's not the fine that's the necessarily the issue here, although that is bad for companies that are on lean budgets. The real challenge is the inefficiency, the engineers having to check every box, the DPIs that last forever, the inability to ship code because you have to have multiple reviews. The sluggishness, like a lot of companies start out by launching a lot of cool stuff, and then as the company gets bigger, the code base gets bigger, shipping stuff takes a really long time, and it takes a long time, and then you spend a lot of time building stuff, and then it takes a long time to deploy it. So the issue is, how do you get to a point where you understand the code, the infra, and the data enough that you can ship stuff in a way that keeps you ahead of the competition? So I would de-emphasize the fines a little bit because the fines are known. You know that risk is coming, but it's the unknown cost continuously of shipping stuff over and over again, the multiple reviews, the bureaucracy. That's the issue here. So when that happens, your company slips in competition, it becomes inefficient, and that is how Microsoft fell behind in the late 1990s, right? So the key is, how do you avoid the mistakes made by these larger companies? And code scanning is a key part of that. Sam?
Yeah, no, I think it's perfectly said. Honestly, it's like a sanity check. You know, there's many times where somebody can make a PR, push it out, and then that change is in production already. And on top of that, it gives a good point to be able to talk to people that are less technical, especially that are also doing the privacy assessments, because you can find that they are probably going back and forth between the business 50 times just to fill out one ROPA. So it just takes a lot of effort and a lot of time, but if you're able to automate it, think about it, and you could be doing other things. You could be looking at other things to audit. You can make your privacy program even bigger. You don't have to just focus on going back and forth between the business 50 times. And on top of that, you know exactly that the code scanning tool is actually checking things before it goes out to production, and you're able to remediate that. And then the developers get to learn so much from that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean that's a great point. Like the more maturity you can bring in, you can do more work and on making your privacy program more mature, work on risk remediation, have more controls. That's kind of what it all enables, right? And I think another key outcome that what we've seen customers are able to do is like you actually kind of get this large piece where you didn't have visibility. So least in the US right now, there's a lot of focus on marketing governance, ad tech governance, or basically just privacy governance for marketing team. Because, as a business, you have to market to people, which means you will have pixels, you will have cookies, you'll have SDKs, you will have tag managers, customer data platforms. So on the marketing side, which is your websites and apps, you'll have a lot of these third-party integrations in the most advanced technological way as you can think of. And again, just referring to, I was just reading through the last few FTC enforcements, and actually FTC is also pretty technical. They actually go in and talk about custom events, conversion APIs, pixels, SDKs, right? So the regulator or the enforcer is actually looking at technology. The marketing technology is pretty complex. So having a view which is scanning your website and mobile app code to figure out what's our third parties and what's the data flow becomes super important. And then the middle piece is kind of all the under the hood stuff, as Sam was saying. There's a lot of things that your users will not see, but that's where a lot of risk lies. That's where a lot of decision making lies. That's where your AI tools get integrated, right? So if you have an AI initiative, chances are they might not be on your website and app, but they might be integrated in the middle, which is things that people don't see. And under the hood, they are carrying that AI privacy risk as well. So by with a privacy code scanning solution, you actually can cover that. So cover everything which your user sees, which regulators sees, which hackers see, which people who are doing bug bounty see, and remediate those risks. But then also in the middle, scan the under the hood stuff, which, as Nishant said, increases that cost because you have to do more DPIs or you have to reassess the same thing again and again, right? So you can get a lot of efficiencies there. And then finally, your third parties carry a lot of risk. So having a view of a confidence on all the third parties which are integrated in your technology stack, your user-facing products, your backend software, and then what data flows become crucial as well. So that gives you end-to-end lineage of what data you collect, how does it get processed, where does it get stored, and where does it get shared. That basically helps you as well. Perfect. So I'm going to jump into a couple of scenarios over the next few slides. But one thing I just wanted to kind of jump on here was, again, like a key difference between if you have utilized a data discovery tool, or you might have some sense of, hey, we can scan databases. And then how does a software solution, which is more scanning the code, how does it kind of augment it, and where does it help, where does it not help? So kind of pretty self-explanatory, but I think one of the biggest gaps that you will see, or one of the biggest advantages of a privacy code scanning solution, is time to value is super low, right? And of course, Sam can talk about it as well. As plugging in a code scanning solution does not require you to scan each database one at a time. It doesn't have any latency requirement. It doesn't slow you down. You can just plug into the same infrastructure you have, and you start to get that visibility pretty fast. It also kind of, from an outcome perspective, it also helps you automate certain things that you want to do. You want to automate your pre-fill your assessment. So because you're looking at the business logic, it's actually doing that. It gives you automated privacy checks. Your governance becomes more automatic. And then it has a nice interface with engineers. So I know, Sam, you have experience with data catalog tools as well. I just wanted to get a sense from your experience, since you've used both data discovery tool and build them as well, and privacy code scanning solution. What's your view, and where would you rate us?
Yeah, so it definitely provides compliments because, honestly, with the data discovery tools, they get to a point where sometimes it gets very bloated on what you're discovering. And so you discover more than what you actually care about. And so then you're able to, like, you have to spend so much time shifting through so many data points and classifiers, instead of just saying, okay, I have a tunnel view and this is actually what I really care about. I care about this PII and I don't care about all this other noise. And so, and able to just give yourself some sanity and actually be like, you know what, this is an audible report right here, and it tells me exactly what's happening. I could say, okay, yes, for sure, this service is actually just ingesting this PII, and I don't have to shift through so much noise. So it's really nice and easy to use, to be honest, and it actually gives you a good peace of mind, especially when you're talking to the privacy operations, because they're not very technical and they really want to be technical, but they want to understand more. So you're able to actually give them more information so they can actually, talk to you about things that they're concerned about.
Yep, perfect. No, thanks for that. And Nishant, do you have I know, like, specifically when we started our engagement, you pretty much at that point of time, you and your team had built like a large data discovery tool. In fact, my initial exposure was like you had a talk at Pepper, and where you had presented that, and then we started talking. So you definitely see the complementary nature, and where one tool is better the other. Can you also talk about how both tools interact in your experience?
I think the challenge and the lesson we learned back then was the fact that we built a data discovery tool that was really effective, but we didn't feel like we were moving the needle in terms of overall risk. Like we were preventing stuff from getting worse in the areas we already knew about. The question is, how do we do it efficiently? How do we do it in a world where M&As are happening? We're buying new companies, there's acquisition taking place. Employees are writing code in a very different way. There are no top-down standards that are uniform across the company. So how do you make sure that you add efficiency? How do you make sure that you can track and make the argument happen? So if you look at my favorite example here on this line number 4, which is unstructured data classification. Like you have unstructured data all over the place, especially with Gen AI coming up, right? So you have, how do you make sure that you get the benefits of that data without having data proliferation? So from my perspective, it is totally fine to start with data classification and discovery, but you use that as a way to say, okay, here is the known attack vector, and let's use that to build a code scanning solution that will help attack that, and then use the code scanning to do more discovery. So people often think of data discovery and code scanning as being mutually exclusive and competitive tools. In my mind, they can essentially be complementary, where you start with data discovery, use those lessons to build privacy code scanning, and then you will understand how to do the privacy at scale. The real goal, again, for me is how do we make sure that we train engineers? Like at the end of the day, we have to train the engineers who work for your company, and there is no easy way to train them. So this is essentially helping you give engineers the coding coaching that is going to require them to understand the stack laterally and the impact of what they do. Like the age when you could write some code yourself and assume that somebody else is going to fix it for you down the road is gone. The code is too fast, data is too vast. So using this is a great way to train engineers better.
Awesome. So that's pretty great. Um, Yeah, and then again, it kind of builds up to this point, and I know there is a question, so I'm going to answer that and also lean on to Sam for that. Is basically kind of like, and I'll just link back to the question, which is about they're considering using Privado to use as a tool to aid in conducting privacy assessments on systems that are already in production. So think of mobile app, website, and all the services which are already live, and how can Privado help them? So I'll answer in this context of this slide, and then also like Sam, because she's real life experience. So yeah, one of the pain points a lot we see is essentially there is when you have to do these privacy impact assessment, you end up spending a lot of time in gathering data, or gathering data to create a risk register. And the time to actually mitigate the risk, which is the outcome of a PI, which is needed for NIST or ISO or GDPR, that doesn't exist because you took away all the efforts or all the time from product and engineering team just in gathering the data. Where Privado really adds value just in a PIA use cases, we'll really scan the code of that application which is in production, which you want to do a privacy impact assessment on, and just build the data inventory automatically. So you'll know whose data this application is processing, what is the data which is being processed, a data flow diagram, any third party sharing, internal data storage, and then the things which are left, and also create some risk automatically, privacy issues automatically. And then as a privacy team and product team, once you sit with a shared knowledge of, okay, this is how this application works. We know the ins and out of data. Now let's look at what the actual risk is. How can we mitigate it? So you go from a place where you spend a lot of time in gathering data to a place where you don't spend any time in gathering data, but all the time in mitigating the risk, in actually building in the privacy controls. And that's what, in my experience, engineers and product managers would really appreciate. So over to you, Sam. Again, like you've had experiences on running it for these use cases.
Yeah, definitely. Exactly what you said. And then on top of that, it's like, you're going to the business so many times that the developers, they build so many different applications, right? And so when they're giving you the information and they're answering these assessments, and then you're reassessing what they're answering, how do you know exactly what's like completely true and completely accurate? There's so many changes that happen so many times throughout the life cycle of the service. So you are able to embed this into your life cycle when you're like deploying and when you're looking at the changes, and you're able to actually take any assessments that you have and you can keep them updated and they are completely accurate at the same time. So it's giving you a peace of mind, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Like there is a point of time and then there is the point of accuracy, right? So you get both time saving and then you also get accurate stuff. And then that becomes your guardrails, right? Like you do a PI at a design stage, and then, what happens during development happens during development. But with a code scanning solution, you can actually verify. And none of this is new. I mean, like honestly, in most companies right now, there is a security scanning stage, right? I mean, we utilize the same with Sam. And so they're doing security threat assessment for some applications, but relying on security scans before things go live. Right? Like if today we have to deploy Privado anywhere, right? We have to show our penetration test of our core application, and the company that we're selling to is running security scans on their software. So think of privacy code scanning as the same capability now available to privacy teams. And for engineers, what Nishant is saying, what he really cares about is getting engineers that coaching at scale and training experience at scale. They have the same experience. Like what I've also seen is what they really appreciate is they've been getting these security alerts for a while. So they are trained to handle security alerts and they know they have to solve them before they go live. When they get another privacy alert, for them, that's not net new work. It's part of their workflow. They write code, they use GenAI to write code, they push it, a scan runs, it gives them feedback, they fix it, and then it goes live. And their features are moving fast, they don't have to stop for anything. So I think that entire workflow reusability becomes really powerful. Perfect. So
I would say one thing I've discovered is when you do privacy code scanning, the engineers will discover services that they didn't know existed. They discover data stores that they didn't know existed. So essentially, I've seen engineers repurpose somebody else's code to use their new use case rather than building something from scratch. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, you could say, okay, just build it bespoke for again. So you have 4 or 5 copies of the code doing the exact same thing. So When you have 4 copies of the same code, you have 45 copies of the data. So that is how code size grows and data size grows without benefit to the company. So how do you make sure that the engineers in this age of decentralized teams and bad documentation, how do you make sure that they can discover capabilities that they could reuse? So that's a pretty critical benefit and accumulates over time. It's like you have compounding interest that grows your investments, you have compounding liability that grows your risk in this case. So privacy code scanning will help you avoid compounding your risk and help you reuse more smartly and efficiently.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a great point. Kind of, yeah, you can fix early and so your liability doesn't keep increasing and suddenly you're not, hey, why do we have all these things broken? Yeah, that's kind of the entire point you made in the book on the data funnel, which was like you're trying to scan things at the data warehouse, and it's too late. Its size has grown that much that if to scan all of that, then it becomes like really, really expensive to do it, right? For everyone to just even maintain that data discovery service. So yeah, code is just like one more way going left. Perfect. So we're also going to discuss there are more questions, so I'm going to link them up in the next few slides, and then we're going to open up for larger Q&A. We started with 3 key problems that privacy programs face, especially for their technology departments as they are, building the program. One is on visibility, and it can manifest on your digital assets like a mobile app or a website in terms of marketing governance and fines, or your core software on why do you use data, your use cases, or features. Second is governance. You have to make promises. How do you enforce them? As Sam pointed, you can use code scanning for that. And enablement, which is, what Nishant said. At the end of the day, it's like training engineers at scale across your organization. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and I'm going to link back all the questions that are coming up. So um, yeah, I mean, I guess we talked about this a little bit, and there's a question around that as well. Is like when we say visibility, like one question that generally people have is, if they look at their data inventory, they have use cases as processing activities that they have to manually create. They have vendors and they have assets. Why should software be part of that inventory? Why should privacy teams have software in there? So over to you, Nishant and Sam, to tackle this.
Wanna go for Sam?
Yeah, definitely. The reason why is because we're building these processing activities based off the software, right? The software is the reason, the main driver of why you're building that processing activity. And so the reason why you want to scan that is because you want to ensure that it complements exactly what you're putting in. I come from the security world, so zero trust is the same thing that I am implementing when I'm doing the privacy code scanning. And the reason why is because I also want to empower the developers because they want to be empowered. They want to be really interested and they want to learn exactly what it is that they're doing, and as well as what's the repercussions, because then they're going to be thinking about that in the back of their minds. So it's better to be proactive than reactive, because then at that point it's too late.
Yeah, over to you, Nishant.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that we're doing it by geo, by application, by code repo, because at the end of the day, in a normal situation, you'd have a lot of planning done top down, you'd have a lot of architecture set up, and then people build against that blueprint. Now what happens is people build a lot of crazy stuff. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. And then you say, okay, how do we create some structure around it? At which point it's very hard to do that because you have to ship stuff. There's people making changes. So it's very hard to, it's like essentially moving into the home, getting all your furniture in, and then saying, okay, where's the roof? What's the blueprint, right? So you need the blueprint and the inspection done before you put all your stuff in the house, right? So I think what this essentially means is you can automate a whole lot of existing capabilities that you need, like the ROPA reports and whatnot. But beyond that, also build a blueprint of what your structure looks like, so you can make intelligent changes, right? So code scanning is about helping you not just function as a company, but plan as a company, but do it in a bottom-up fashion without creating unnecessary process. So at the end of the day, this is about giving your engineers choice and visibility.
Perfect. And yeah, there was a question on the chat around, or on the Q&A around Privado's capability around discovering digital fingerprinting, or when identity gets derived by a combination of attributes versus just one. And yeah, the answer is yes. Basically, not only that, you can also, your risk also starts to go up based on these combinations, right? So I remember like very early on when we were building Privado, there was one customer of ours where they ended up finding IP address, cookies, and precise location in one software backend. And they never used to process IP before, and they started processing it for DDoS prevention. Essentially, they didn't want attacks by external actors. So they wanted to say if there's too much traffic from one place, we are going to prevent that. But so that's the security legitimate reason, right? You want for fraud prevention, or you don't want your website to go down. But if you combine IP and precise location, you can pretty much figure out, who that person is. So you actually ended up going from a place where you didn't have a lot of information to a place where you had a lot of information about that. So you can detect things like that in Privado very easily. And yeah, any privacy code scanning solution worth their salt should be able to do that. Uh, Perfect. I'm going to go and move to the next one, which is governance. So I think this is one problem that I think about a lot as well as I read privacy policies and privacy notices, right? Like you have to, at this point of time, and even like as a B2B company, you have to declare stuff in your DPAs. If a regulator has an inquiry, you have to tell something to the regulator. You have to make promises in privacy policy. For me, like this is very centralized, right? That you have to make these top-down promises, but then when actual software development happens, that's very decentralized, right? And one of the ways that people are trying to do it with is with assessments, right? You try to do assessments, and then that's how you figure out. Um, One question to me is like, can assessments cover all of that? And that's kind of the gap we see. But yeah, kind of like Sam, if I have to ask you, privacy teams already do assessments, and the same is true. The same question is for you, Nishant, as well. Why should they now have an additional code check as policies as part of their software development lifecycle when they already did an assessment at the design stage?
That's because services are always changing, right? And those services are what is driving those assessments, right? You're building those assessments because of what the products that you have, and you're trying to say, okay, exactly, we have a legitimate reason to be collecting this information for this particular service. And then sometimes ROPAs actually have an umbrella, and this umbrella covers multiple services, but things change throughout the whole time of the life cycle of the service. So you're not able to actually go back and forth because privacy just kind of got introduced just recently, maybe like 2-3 years ago, right? So there's a lot of things that are happening after the fact. And so you're kind of getting this backlog, and you're not able to actually say, okay, is there a better and a more efficient way to build these ROPOS reports? Is there a better and efficient way to automate these things? Because we already have so much that's going on. There's laws that are changing constantly. So a lot of things that we're doing in the privacy world also has to evolve and adapt. Nishant?
Definitely. And I also feel like, to Sam's point, not only is it the stack changing, but the idea that the design is complete is fiction. It's like saying the check is in the mail. The design is never complete because people have all these dependencies, all these changes, because code is decentralized, right? So this is about continuously making sure that you are testing your code. So I don't think about privacy code scanning as a separate capability. I think of it as a continuous capability. Like you are checking your work on a continuous basis. And at the end of the day, you end up in a situation where you have your CEO wants to understand, do I buy company X or not? And you look at data from this store, it says yes. You look at data from that store, it says no. It is very hard to make intelligent decisions with data. And unless you have visibility into the code, you simply cannot do that. So at the end of the day, I would think about embedding this work into your code structures so that as your design changes, as your code changes, which means you're going to go back and update the design accordingly. The arrows go both ways. This happens on a continuous basis. So there are all of these historical scans that have happened. They check for very, very point in time things, like checking for X on date Y. In this case, you're checking on date X, X minus one, X plus one, and all the way beyond, right? So you have this insurance policy. At the end of the day, what you want is some degree of certainty that somebody somewhere is watching your code and making sure the risk doesn't go beyond the scenes, right? And to Sam's point, as the design keeps changing, how do you make sure that your discipline, your enforcement, your visibility changes alongside with it, right? So yeah, that's what this is about.
Awesome. And then, yeah, just one last on enablement. And this is kind of an interesting conversation that always happens. I remember at IPP or other events when we are talking, it's like, hey, who's your customer at the end of the day? As privacy office is always the external customer, which is the user, which is, if you're a B2B company, then another customer who's trying to buy you and looking at your privacy posture. And then a user who's reading your privacy policy, getting that privacy experience across your website and mobile app, and trying to submit a DSAR and stuff like that. But then also you have internal customers, right, who are supporting you in a way. And I think engineers and developers and product team are a big part of your internal customers who you need to serve as well. So that's my view. But I actually wanted to get insight from Sam and Nishant on why should privacy team think about empowering engineers, enabling engineers to do privacy on their own? Why are they customers as well? So any thoughts or disagreements as well?
Sam, you go
Yeah,
first.
that's a good point. Honestly, the developers are customers, if you're thinking about it in a business perspective, because the developers are the ones that are building the products. And you want to empower them because you want them to understand exactly what it is that you're doing, the importance of your job, what's the importance of privacy. And at the end of the time, end of the day, like the developers, the customers is the end users, right? So then they're also protecting and serving the end users, and they're thinking about them. I mean, they're already thinking about them in a security fashion, as well as building the features. And so you want to provide the best features, the best product to your end users. So it's a whole life cycle if you think about it. So honestly, when you're able to give them more information for them to grow and to be a better developer in a sense, because nobody wants to push a bug to production, for example. And to be honest, it's all about knowledge, and knowledge is power. So empower people to have that knowledge, because it's going to empower you to empower other people. And it's going to be like a word of mouth kind of situation. So that's what I've noticed. And I really appreciate being able to do that.
I love the analogy, like basically, uh, like we talk about accountability in GDPR a lot, right? Like, but if you think about it, like developers feel accountable about a bug they have pushed, because they can test for it and they write test cases. The same has happened with security issues. And what Sam you've been passionately advocating for is if you put privacy next to it, then it's not only the privacy team or the privacy engineering team or the legal team who's thinking about privacy, but you have these army of engineers and product managers who constantly are, as they're designing and as they push things, they get a feedback, they're improving things. And for them, like privacy, trust, safety, experience, latency, all of them become part of the overall product experience. And you have a lot more people thinking about privacy. So I love that analogy. Nishant, like what's your thought here?
I would take it a step further, and Sam made an excellent point. I would say when you have these capabilities available to your engineers, and when you can prove that over time the engineers have become more smarter about it, they make better decisions, you could take some of these triggers and make them available to your end customers. So as an example, if you have an API that lets you scan your code as an engineer and gives you visibility into how the data gets used, you can essentially have a subset of that data and say, let's make this configuration available to our end customer, and they can say, what have I done on your service for the last 30, 40 days? What data do you have about me? How does that data get used? And when you have that transparency with your end customer, they will trust you more. And when they trust you more, they will use you more. And then what happens at the end of the day is this is how your company's reputation improves. And Uber, we saw this. When we improved our reputation with the end customer, the regulators, the people who are critiquing us every single day, essentially backed away a little bit. Because at the end of the day, what happens is your customer has the answers. If the customer trusts you, the incentive for somebody to go after you is a lot more minimized. You see this again and again and again. This is how companies' reputations improve. Like, and when I joined Uber back in 2018, 2019, we were in the news almost every single day for bad privacy practices. And by the time I left, the same newspapers are highlighting our privacy center, right? If you go to the Uber app right now and you click on the word privacy in the app, my team built the privacy center that comes up. And we got a ton of great publicity because all we did in this case was we didn't build anything super special. We had all those capabilities available for engineers within the company to have data governance that was sound and real, right? And what we did was we essentially built a nice UI and made that available as a privacy center to our end customers. So think of this not just as capability for your business or your engineers. This is something you could build for the end customers. And if you build that trust directly with the customers, your business regulation costs could go down pretty substantially. Not to mention you will have fewer bad headlines in the press. So this is, I'm going to emphasize again and again, what you see on the screen is not just about doing the right thing, it's also about doing the thing right.
Yeah, that's powerful. Perfect, which kind of brings us to the last point, which is Q&A. And, there've been questions throughout the webinar, but, we have like probably 9 minutes left. So feel free to drop any questions on the topic, on anything else that you might be thinking as well. That's fine too. But yeah, use the Q&A button and just put whatever is top of mind. Anything specific about Privado, about the code scanning capabilities, privacy engineering? Sam is a privacy engineer, Nishant is too. So yeah, we'll be happy to take those questions. All right, I can see a few questions coming in. Let's. Okay, I can see and I can answer this one. Like there is one question around governance for ad tech or marketing, and how privacy code scanning can help there. Okay. So I mean, there are like three pain points that, or like from an ad tech governance perspective or marketing governance, which is kind of at least in the US being like in the press for the entire year, is we kind of see two kind of issues. One is you have consent banners which are misconfigured. So you want to test that, you want to audit that continuously. So that's something that you can use Privado for, both on your mobile app and website. The second pain point we see is these pixels and these marketing, like the use case of a marketing retargeting vendor or analytics vendor is you want to create a user journey to either measure how well a feature is, or if someone adds something in a cart or does a certain action on your product, you want to retarget them so they come back to you and spend more time or spend more money on your platform. The problem is that entire logic is written in code, right? Someone will write a code that, hey, there will be a logic of a code of, let's say, a e-commerce website, and when someone clicks or favorites a item, that's when they will trigger a custom event saying favorited and send it to tag manager or metapixel, right? Now if they favorited I don't know, watermelon, that's low risk. But if you are a health, if you're a pharmacy and if you're selling medicines, if that goes to pixel, that definitely contains health information, because along with the user ID name, you also sending the drug that they favorited, right? So all of this logic is in code. So that data flow of what data actually ends up getting shared happens via code, and that's something you can scan again. So for ad tech governance, marketing governance, to answer the question, getting the inventory of marketing vendors integrated in your website and app, getting the flows and checking for consent are three ways you can solve for that. And that's all possible via code scanning. There are a bunch of more questions. Uh, Discuss, can I use PCS to start data mapping? Yeah, that's also a great question, Joyce. Yeah. So we kind of discussed today, Nishant, on, hey, if you had data discovery, like what you're missing is code scanning, but like a lot of people don't even have data discovery. And now with the hindsight, let's say Nishant and even Sam, if you want to answer, if someone starts with code scanning, can that help data discovery efforts down the road? And yeah, I can answer like it will automate your data map to end, but what's your view there?
Absolutely, I think it'll definitely help, because my sense is if you have already gone down the data discovery path, that's totally fine. Code scanning will help you make much more efficient. But if you're going to start from scratch, starting with the code scanning is much more critical, because you are training the engineers, you are helping them write better code. It's essentially like having continuous testing. Like you would not ship code without having tested it. You wouldn't buy a car without testing it for a gas leak, right? So it's about making sure that you build the right ethic from the get-go. Again, it's about engineer training, it's about business efficiency, and customer transparency. All three of them go hand in hand. So code scanning helps you understand exactly not just what you're building, but how you're building it, right? So I would say code scanning is the new thing to do, simply because the time you spend on fixing stuff is going to be better spent building stuff correctly from the get-go.
Awesome. Yeah, and then there are more questions. So there's a question on, for the ad tech industry, is Privado able to scan the code and look into consent PI via connected TV? Yes. Like for us, it doesn't matter. All your user interfaces, TV, mobile, website, game, like Xbox game, doesn't matter. Like we can scan all code. So yes, we'll be able to help you on that ad tech governance use case there as well. There are more questions. So one question is around, I think like I would like lean on Sam on that. So a question is a pretty interesting one, like can Privado, and by the way, we have a lot of customers like this, can Privado be used by organizations who don't have privacy engineers? And basically, could a non-privacy engineer use Privado and achieve equivalent results? So I know like larger teams, we have a lot of customers with no privacy engineers. We have some customers who have, but Sam, like you've been on both sides. So what's your take as a customer?
Honestly, looking at the report that Privado provides after scanning a repository or code base, it gives you a lot of information to the point where you don't really need to be very technical to actually understand what's going on. And the great thing is that you get to have conversations with the engineers to understand exactly what is happening. So, for example, it can be integrated with OneTrust and it can build a record of processing for you. It has everything broken down to what vendors are using that service, as well as what data points are being leveraged. It's breaking everything down to the controller, to the processor, to the owner. And so you're able to understand what is being written, what is being read, where is it going, as well as whole lineage between that point of time. So it does give you a lot of information and it does break a lot of things down for you. And it's not too like technical to the point where you're just looking at it and your eyes are getting dizzy.
Perfect. Thanks for that. And yeah, I know we have 3 minutes left. So there's one last question. And if there are more, we will take them offline as well. So feel free to add them. So there's a question around how does pricing work? We scan for security issues in GitHub. I think that's the more interesting piece for everyone. So right now this company has in GitHub, they have security approval done. And if the code passes the security approval, that's when it goes to their AWS, which means the change goes live. And can Privado be integrated as privacy approval in GitHub? And then that becomes a requirement. Yeah, exactly. That's how, like, me and Sam chatted about that a lot. And that's basically exactly how you get that governance, which is programmatic and it's always running for you. So what would end up happening is Privado will become like next to the security check, a privacy approval check. And then as the engineer is getting a security feedback on an issue, they will get on privacy. And so you are very assured, like if something goes live in your AWS environment in production, like your mobile app gets distributed in the next version, you are very sure of what has happened in that delta. You are very, very sure you can prevent things from going live. All of that control exists. So that's a typical use case of, and that's the thing that a privacy code scanning solution can do, which a data discovery won't. So for you to scan data it has to go live and data has to be created and data has to be pushed to your database to scan it. On the code, there's no data yet. It's just the logic. When it goes live, then someone uses it and then data gets created. So you can actually interface things at the code level and prevent that data discovery problem that you might discover maybe 6 months from now. So that's another advantage. Perfect. I guess, yeah, those were all. I mean, there are, I think, more questions. We're going to answer them offline as well. But thanks everyone for coming in. We really appreciate you joining us today. And I want to thank Sam and Nishant for candidly, answering all the questions and sharing your experiences. And, stay connected, everyone. Thanks, everyone.